Throughout my life, pretty much every system that I've been involved with has been designed to help me succeed and keep me safe in doing so. And when I was a kid and a teenager, I kind of took for granted that everybody had this experience and this privilege because it didn't feel like a privilege to me. It felt like a right. And what I didn't understand was that my black peers were not afforded this privilege. The systems which were helping me were actively hurting them only on the basis of the color of their skin. Black Lives Matter is not a controversial statement. It is an affirmation of humanity, necessary because humanity is systemically stripped away from black people. And this systemic racism goes back centuries to slavery, to the Reconstruction, to the Jim Crow era, to the war on drugs, and to the modern age of mass incarceration. And we see undeniable examples of this dehumanization and the resultant violence in the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, just to name a few of the long, terrifyingly long list of black victims. The fact of the matter is that there are systems which are designed to dehumanize and justify violence against black people. And though these systems may not be as overt as they have been in times past, they still exist. And they're reprehensible. They're doing irreparable, undeniable damage to black people. And they must be dismantled. I believe that it is my moral duty as a human to educate myself about these systems and to engage in the process of dismantling them. And as a white person, I haven't had to face this type of systemic discrimination. And so I have to understand that my intuitions are probably mostly incorrect. For how could I understand a system when I haven't seen the totality of its consequences? Only the select good consequences chosen for me because of my race. For me, this makes the process of listening and educating myself and engaging in conversation that much more important. And it's that much more important that I do it with an open mind, understanding that my intuitions and what has been conditioned into me is usually wrong. So I want to share with you some resources which have helped me along this path of education. And in particular, I want to share with you some books. I wanted to share these books in a video because they have been foundational not only to my understanding of anti-Black racism, but to my morality as a whole. So the first book that I'm recommending is The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And this book, I knew who Malcolm X was vaguely before reading the book, but I didn't know his story. And his story is such a powerful one about transformation, about thinking critically, and most importantly, about pursuing justice and what you believe to be right at all costs in the face of overwhelming, truly overwhelming barriers. And I think that this is a book that everybody should read. It has been foundational to who I am as a person, I would say, and the way that I think about justice in the world. So the next book is White Fragility. And this is a book which, as a white person, helped me a lot to be able to understand, to see, and to confront racist ideologies which are conditioned in me. And it it helped me to get more comfortable, I would say, talking about race by identifying this kind of fragile discomfort that I have when race is brought up, and how being silent and how not talking and not choosing to educate myself, this form of ignorance, actually contributes to systemic racism. So I would say if you're a white person who's uncomfortable talking about race, consider reading this book. It's a good read. The next book is The New Jim Crow. And this book, if you think that systemic racism is dead, which I think a lot of people do, I think a lot of people think that systemic racism died with the civil rights movement. That when Jim Crow laws were abolished, that everything racism, systemic racism went away. But this is just not true. Systemic racism lives on to this day in the justice system and in the system of mass incarceration. And this book proved that beyond a doubt to me. It is a foundational book in understanding this, and I think that a lot of people could benefit from reading it. The next book is a little bit different. It's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And while it is an autobiography, Maya Angelou pushes the boundaries of what autobiography is, because this reads like a novel. It reads as if it's fiction. You are truly, the characters in this are brought to life in a way that only the best characters in the best novels are. And the emotions that this story evoked in me were it's very, very low lows and very high highs. I cried multiple times reading this book. First, tears of sadness as I saw the impact that racism had on Maya Angelou's life in particular, but also, towards the end, there's tears of pride and happiness as she realized herself, and it takes you on this emotional roller coaster. And I think it's not only a foundational book for understanding racism and anti-black racism, but for understanding humanity. I would say Maya Angelou is one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, to be sure. So the final book that I'd like to recommend to you here is a book written by my hero, Brian Stevenson. And the book is called Just Mercy. And in this book, Stevenson goes through not only a history of systemic racism in America, from slavery to the Reconstruction to the Jim Crow era to the war on drugs and mass incarceration, but he shows through examples from his legal work how systemic racism is used today to not only deal injustice to Black people, but to deal state sanctioned violence. And this book has been turned into a Hollywood film featuring Michael B. Jordan. And it's free to watch right now for the month of June. If you're in America, you can find it on pretty much every streaming platform, YouTube included, I believe. It's worth a watch, and all of these books are worth a read. And while books are not sufficient to educate oneself, I think they're a really good start. And I know there are many other great books. This is by no means a comprehensive list. These are just the books that I've read personally and that have contributed to my understanding. As early on as that understanding is, and as I continue to read more books that deal with this form of anti-black racism and systemic racism, I will be sure to continue to talk about them on this channel, as I've talked about all of these books in the past. But I think it's important to note that books are not sufficient, because we have to be engaging in conversation, we have to be listening, and more than that, I think we have to be taking action right now. And there are a few ways. There are many ways that action can manifest itself. One is in financial support of the people who are most well positioned to make this type of progress. So for my part, what I've done is I've donated to two organizations. So I've donated to the NAACP LDF, the Legal Defense Fund, and I've donated to EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative, the organization that Brian Stevenson runs. And the reason I chose these organizations is because they're well established in kind of moving forward the fight against systemic racism and in dismantling these systems. And so I would encourage you, if you're in a position financially to be able to contribute, to take a look at these organizations and to consider donating as well. I would also encourage you to vocally participate in the democratic process. It takes 10 minutes maybe to write an email, maybe another 10 minutes to call your local political representatives. And if you don't know who your local political representatives are, I've linked a couple sites in the description of this video that can help you find them. So throughout this week, I've been doing this. I've been sending emails, I've been calling politicians, and even though it might feel like sometimes it feels like your emails are kind of just going into the void, or you're just talking to somebody who you know doesn't, you feel like you're not heard. I promise you that it matters that you are making your voice heard in this way. Okay, because we live in a democratic society, and democratic representatives are listening to people right now. But talking about democratically elected representatives, make sure you've registered to vote if you haven't already. It takes about 2 minutes. If you're in America, you go to vote.org and you just sign up to register. It's very quick. And if you don't do it, you don't get to participate in the election. And so it's critical that you do this. And I've seen that voter registration is down right now because of the pandemic. So I'd really encourage you to do this. Like I said, it takes 2 minutes. You go to vote.org, you register to vote, and then you'll be able to participate in the election. The final thing that I'm committing to doing, and that I would ask you to commit to doing as well, is to engage in this process well after the media attention dies down and the protesters go home. Justice will not be served, to be clear, when cops, a few bad cops, are arrested and put in jail or imprisoned, because justice will not be served until there is a dramatic overhaul of the justice system and these racist systems are dismantled. And listen, I totally understand that this can feel overwhelming and that it can feel a little hopeless sometimes. But I want to share with you a quote from my hero, Bryan Stevenson, that talks about hope. He says, "Hope is the enemy of injustice, and injustice prevails where hopelessness persists." To me, what this says is that we must continue to have hope and to take action. But what he talks about is hope. He has a way of saying it, that the type of hope we need is, he says, not that pie in the sky stuff, not a preference for optimism over pessimism, but rather an orientation of the spirit. The kind of hope that creates a willingness to position oneself in a hopeless place and be a witness, that allows one to believe in a better future, even in the face of abusive power. So as I finish this video, I ask this of you: to engage open-mindedly in this process of education with the resources available to you, and to take action to dismantle these racist systems, which we must do. And we must believe in a better future, and we must maintain hope, even in the face of these overwhelming barriers. Thank you. Black Lives Matter.